Well, we'll go ahead and get started, and good afternoon and welcome everyone. Alpha Chi of St. Catherine College is so happy to present this presentation of Dr. Robert Slocum's new book, Seeing and Believing. So, without further ado, we're going to get this presentation on the road. Joe Silman, our sponsor. Mr. Silman, are you here? Yes.
I'm over here.
Yeah, I know, front and center, is going to do our invocation. After that, Marlene Kasama is going to do the introduction of Dr. Robert Slocum, which I think we all know. And then Matt Bloom, who is also a member of Alpha Chi, is going to take what we call our wrap-up session. He'll be taking questions and answers from you all and do the wrap-up for our presentation this afternoon. So welcome again. Enjoy this presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm relatively familiar with Rob's work, and I was looking around for something that I thought would be appropriate for an invocation for this occasion, and I ran across two things. One, a poem selection from St. Catherine of Siena, and then I'm going to take a prayer from the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer. The selection from St. Catherine is called The Sanctuary. It could be said that God's foot is so vast that this entire earth is but a field on God's toes. And all the forests in this world came from the same root of just one single hair of God's. But then, what then is not a sanctuary? Where then can I not kneel and pray at a shrine made holy by God's presence? Almighty and everlasting God, you made the universe with all its marvelous order, its atoms, worlds, and galaxies, and the infinite complexity of living creatures. Grant that as we probe the mysteries of your creation, we may come to know you more truly and more surely fulfill our role in your eternal purpose. In the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Good afternoon and happy spring. I'm Marlene Kasama, and I'm a graduate student here at the college, and I have the honor of introducing Dr. Slocum. But before I do, I'd like to share some information about him. Dr. Rob Slocum is a professor here at St. Catherine College, and he teaches courses in Christ and Culture, Quest for God, Applied Ethics and Society, as well as courses in the graduate program, Religion and Ministry Leadership Program. Dr. Slocum has a doctorate in systematic theology from Marquette University and taught in the theology departments of Marquette and Mount Mary College in Milwaukee before coming to St. Catherine. Dr. Slocum is also an Episcopal priest and has served served parishes in 3 dioceses. He was the ecumenical officer of the Diocese of Lexington. He is the author, editor, or co-editor of 12 books, including Seeing and Believing, published by Forward Movement Press, and which is the basis of today's presentation. Dr. Slocum is married to Victoria, who is here today with us, and has 3 grown children, Claire, who is also here, Rebecca, and Jacob. It is a pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon Dr. Robert Slocum.
I just want to express thanks to everyone who helped this to be possible, to Alpha Chi and the good organization, to Jim and Evelyn, to Alona and Andrew and Jesse, and all the people who've been involved in helping this to come together. And I just appreciate the thoroughness and the care and the attention that lets us come together to do these things. And I just want to say how much I appreciate this time that we have together. Let me tell you a little bit about this book that I've been working on for some time now. It really is sort of shaped in many ways by my experience at St. Catherine College. It started back in 2009, and early on, I started using it in one of my classes, and an undergraduate student John Graves was in it, and I'd mentioned, because he knew we were using one of my books in class, or he knew I did books, But I mentioned, I said, well, I've got this draft that I'm working on, and he said, gosh, you've got to get this thing published. You've just got to do this. Anyway, he was very encouraging at a time that I wasn't even necessarily thinking of those terms. And so that's been a part of it. And the conversations that came around it. Another student of mine, Megan Metcalf, used the expression of snapshots. In other words, when I try to explain the method in this presentation, it's in a way snapshots. So there are images, but the images are images to suggest a way of thinking. They're not illustrations of the reflections. They are just to kind of get you thinking visually. So the image that I'm talking about in this book is like a moment in time. It could be a moment in the story. I mean, whatever. We're just talking about, Hemingway shortly before the conversation. I'm not likening myself to him by any means, but I'm just saying use of story, a moment in the story that can become the starting point for a deeper reflection. It could be a moment in your own life. So many of these images are anecdotal, if you will, from my own life and experience. What happened to me when I was working in the VA hospital as an undergraduate, or what happened when I talked to someone. But I'm just saying, like a snapshot, a moment in time that becomes the starting point for a reflection that things can move forward from. So anyway, I'm just so pleased to be able to share this in this venue. So, good academic institution that this is, I'm going to give you the longer version of the introduction before launching into any of the actual reflections. I will say the book itself is a collection of about 53 of these short reflections. Forward Movement Press did well by these. And the reason I say that is I can't take any credit for the design of the book. They did that. But it includes response space for the reader. I've written questions. So the idea with this book is not just something you read and pass on, or read and drop in the library or something. Nothing wrong with that. But that each person's book then becomes an occasion for their reflection, so that each book literally becomes unique. It's got my prompts, if you will, my picture, if you will, but then your response, your doodle, your drawing, your poem, your reflection. So if I ask questions, you can provide your own answers, and then your answers, your doodle, your poem will be different from anyone else's. So again, it becomes distinctively yours in that way. And so I hope to go forward with that. So let me just summarize the basic introduction here. Part of this comes from the work of an Anglican theologian named Austin Farrer, but he basically says new beliefs call for new images. One of his books studying a very challenging topic for New Testament writing, A Rebirth of Images, was studying the book of Revelation. Not many scholars that I know want to venture into that dynamic space, but he argues that the new belief of Christianity demands new images. So he talks about, in very systematic ways, how the images of Judaism have been reborn, transformed, newly shaped in terms of Christianity. Now, whatever your perspective on his point, I like his process of saying new belief calls for new images. And so it suggests, whatever your particular belief is, a method of rediscovering images in everyday life, in your own life. So again, the point of this book is ultimately not to appreciate, wow, didn't I have some great images to reflect on, but rather to share a method that I hope you will use, where you can recognize your own images. You identify your own images as a starting point for faith, for reflection, for meaning. So I hope my method can, to some degree, become a method you can share. So, in terms of the transformation of images, Carl Jung likewise sees emergence of new images as a sign of a living truth. So every descent is followed by an ascent. The vanishing shapes are shaped anew, and truth is valid in the end only if it suffers change and bears new witness and new images, new tongues, like a new wine that is put into new bottles. In a similar way, I can talk about how T.S. Eliot, the poet, says in 4 quartets, words strain and crack under the burden of meaning will not stay still. We still have more to say. So the images can help us to discover the more that we haven't yet found a way to put into words. That sense that what we've said is good, but there's more to discover out there. An Episcopal theologian friend of mine, Bob Cooper, says the place of our imagination is as much our soul as our mind. So that sense of the imaginative quality in our lives as the place where God meets us and we meet God. And even a glimpse of transcendence can change us. So the idea is that perhaps each of these images can be for us an occasion to be transformed, to discover ourselves as new people, to discover ourselves in new ways. So the imagination connects our everyday life to the transcendent and holy beyond ourselves. As William Blake says in Auguries of Innocence, I know at least one person interested to hear about Blake, we may see a world in a grain of sand, or a heaven in a wild flower. In other words, the microcosm becomes a macrocosm. Through this small image, this small thing we can hold in our hands, it opens up into all of experience if we let it. And imagination provides new awareness for the whole of our lives and the world surrounding us. It gives us new eyes to see, new ways to share. So that's part of why this can be so effective, is it gets under some of the conscious barriers that we all kind of carry around. The image gets underneath the rationalizations, the distancing mechanisms. If we could just talk about how it moves us, how it connects to us, it can be very powerful. I have to say I've used this recently in a church class. So I just read it and the people they take some time and write down their response and they're off to the races. I mean, I'm just sitting back going, wow, that's interesting. Wow, I never thought of that. Wow, that's so. It can be an opportunity, an occasion, a way for people to engage. I mean, as the proverbial statement goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it may be a word picture, it may be an actual printed image that we work with. So I think you get the idea of what I'm suggesting here. One other point, though, about this, if it's a scene, as in a scene in a story, a scene in an occasion, one way to engage it is to imagine yourself in it, to imagine yourself there. Maybe you're one of the characters, maybe you're a witness. So it's sort of like the intersection time, the time where we are now and the time that's being described and the time we hope for in its fullness can all come together in one place. So, with no further ado, let me give you a few of these images. If we were in a different format, what I would do is take time and give you 10 minutes or so to write your response to each of these. But since we're in this kind of format, I'm just going to lay it down and then hope that you can think about it more later. So it'll be with you. Okay, here's one image. The book Left Behind. It was a Bible. A retired priest gave it to me before I went to seminary. I used it in a class and put special tabs on it before my ordination exams. But I left it behind when I moved from a parish where I served for about 10 years. It was in the library and I forgot it. Years later, a parishioner was looking for a study Bible and the priest invited her to take one from the library. She picked that one, the one I left behind, and appreciated my markings and notes in the margins and such. After a while, she realized it was mine and sent it to me with thanks. I was amazed. It all came back to me with that well-worn Bible, my friend's gift, the times of study, the good years of ministry in that parish, and the many good friends. And even if all the times weren't good, it was a reminder of something important that was never really left behind. It was an unexpected gift and a blessing, something gracious returned to me. I'm reminded of a favorite scene of mine in the movie version of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Luna Lovegood, looking for her missing belongings, tells Harry that her mom always said the things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the ways we expect. Or as Rumi, a Persian Muslim mystic of the 13th century, says in Unmarked Boxes, "Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes around in another form. The child weaned from mother's milk now drinks wine and honey mixed." The gifts we offer can become the gifts we receive. We reap what we sow. Some people say what goes around comes around. And we do seem to shape our destiny by our actions, as some Eastern religions describe in terms of karma. Jesus advises in the Sermon on the Plain that we'll not be judged if we stop judging. We'll not be condemned if we don't condemn. We'll be forgiven if we forgive. And if we give, we'll receive generously. Indeed, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be lavished upon us, because the measure we give will be the measure we receive. Our expressions of generosity, courtesy, forgiveness, and compassion may encourage others to respond and live in similar ways. As the famous Indian peace activist Mahatma Gandhi said, we can be the change we want to see in the world. Aware or unaware of what they're doing, and for better or worse, people may follow our lead. The world will be a quieter place if we're gentle, and a more frightening place if we're cruel. A sharp accusation can prompt an angry defense, and a smile can draw out a friendly response. We can begin to shape our culture and society. As we give ourselves, we may discover we're living in a world of abundance and find unexpected ways to offer and receive. The Bible I received became a gift for a stranger and eventually returned to me with thanks as another gift. Questions? Has something lost ever returned to you in an unexpected way? Have you been surprised by a gift you received or an unexpected opportunity to offer a gift? Has a situation in your life ever changed because of a gift you gave or received? What was the gift? What difference did it make? Let me give you another. Rabid. One summer I was working for the security police at Vanderbilt University, and I heard a startling report from the radio dispatcher. There was a rabid dog loose in the university hospital. I quickly went to the hospital floor and ward where the mad dog was supposed to be. There was a crowd of people gathered around the exit, looking with great concern through a small window in the door. On the landing of the stairwell was a hound. He was sitting quietly and panting heavily in the warm, not air-conditioned hospital stairwell. It was summer in Nashville. The dog was drooling. He looked up at me sweetly through the window. "I'm not going out there with that dog," said a burly security policeman. "Step back," I said, and opened the door to the stairwell. The hound seemed pleased with my company and unaware of the ruckus he was causing beyond the door. "Come on, boy," I said, whistling for him and snapping my fingers. "Let's get out of here." So I skipped to the steps, and he followed me down some 8 flights of stairs with a little encouragement along the way. Finally, we reached the ground floor. I opened the exit door, and the hound sauntered out of the hospital. I called in the mission completed code to the radio dispatcher. It was fun. I was glad I got there first. Someone might have heard him. The people on the other side of the door were judging by appearances. They thought the hound was foaming at the mouth. They jumped to a conclusion and started to panic. I expect none of them had ever seen a rabid dog, but they were being vigilant. Appearances can fool us. It might be tempting to reach conclusions on the basis of race or age or gender or ancestry, but we're easily misled by prejudices, assumptions, and stereotypes. The latest gossip can also bias us and keep us from ever really knowing the person before us. The accuracy of an unfair judgment is not improved by many repetitions. We may need to wait on a decision despite the apparent clarity of appearances. Everyone seemed to agree the hound was rabid, but he was just hot and wet. I seem to be doing VA stories today, so here's another. These kind of get randomly picked almost. Turning around. I was an undergraduate intern in the psychology department of a hospital in Nashville. One day, the clinical director went to give some important test to a patient, and he took me along with a graduate student. We were serious about the significant task ahead and moved quickly through the hospital. We passed a patient who was sitting on the floor near an elevator. He was wearing a patient's brown uniform, that's what they wore at the time. He turned his head slowly and painfully side to side. His eyes were half closed and he seemed to wince. All three of us passed by him on our way to the appointment. The director turned around to see what was wrong, and we followed him back. The clinical psychologist almost knelt before the patient to face him and asked, "Are you hearing voices?" No, the patient had been through some kind of oral surgery and he was in considerable pain. There was blood in his mouth. I must admit, I wasn't going to stop for the patient. We had important work and I would have kept going. I was busy and needed to be someplace. I was in a hurry. At least someone turned around. Someone saw the need that was right before our eyes. That was my conversion. New directions may appear in surprising times and ways. Unimagined possibilities and opportunities can present themselves to us, but we need to be listening with our hearts, observant, ready to respond, ready to delay or release our plans and agendas. Our real mission may be something unexpected that's right in front of us. Okay. Another, sunrise. The new day begins with glory when sunlight fills the clouds and the eastern horizon. Golden light breaks the darkness like a crack in the dome of the sky. Homer recalls the shining of dawn's rose-red fingers in the Odyssey. Yucca Burma, a 17th century mystic, describes the sunrise in terms of the morning redness. It's the color of new life and hope and the promise of a new day visible in majestic skies. The color of dawn may be orange or red. Perhaps you can see the sunrise in the reddish-orange ink used by William Blake, an English poet and painter, in his illuminated printing, with dawn's light breaking into every word. The sunrise says to wake up, roosters crow, the world is stirring. People get out of bed and stand up. We come into the daylight splendor, in the words of a poem and hymn text. Look up. The Buddha answered, I am awake, when asked, what are you? Being awake is living in the present moment, right now, without distractions or buffers. Being awake is living in a new day. The possibilities come alive in each moment. I once visited a cemetery in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where the graves were positioned to face east. They faced the horizon of each new morning, waiting to rise in glory in the first light of that final day. At the opening of morning prayer, we say, Lord, open our lips, and our mouths shall proclaim your praise. We can see God's bright glory in the morning and praise the giver of light. We're awake. Questions? What wakes you up? What does the morning bring for you? What is today's gift? Where is the light? What's on the horizon? Are you ready? Monkey trap. Some trappers in South America seek to capture monkeys without harming them, to take them to zoos and such. So they take a large gourd and empty it on the inside, much as we might empty out a pumpkin to make a jack-o'-lantern at Halloween. They carve a small hole in the side of the gourd, making an opening that's just big enough for the monkey's paw. Inside, they place some tasty nuts that the monkey will love to eat and then secure the trap. When the monkey arrives, he slips his paw into the gourd and it just fits. But when he closes his paw on the nuts, he's trapped. Of course, the monkey can leave any time. All he has to do is let go of the nuts, and he's free to go. But he doesn't want to do that. He wants the nuts. So he'll stay there with his paw in the gourd until the trappers arrive to take him away. Sometimes we trap ourselves by our unwillingness to let go. We get stuck and can't take the next steps. We hold on to something that's really gone, unavailable, or inappropriate. Maybe it's a time of life, a way of thinking, or an ended relationship. We tie ourselves down in ways that prevent us from living the life that's available right now. No amount of discussion or explanation will really make a difference. We just need to let go and move on. If your hand isn't open, you can't receive a gift. There's no room if your hands are full. If your hand is closed, you may turn away a friend or someone who could be a friend. And certainly, as Indira Gandhi says, you can't shake hands with a clenched fist. Questions? If you look at your hand, what do you see? Is it closed like a fist? Are you holding on, clutching at something? Are you full? Are you stuck? Are you trapped? Or is your hand open for all you can receive? Arrows. One summer, our church hosted reading camp, a week-long event for 3rd and 4th graders in the local area. It met in the parish hall behind the church, so Victoria, my wife, as well as the camp director, chalked large blue arrows on sidewalk squares, all leading to the parish hall. The arrows helped the kids find their way to where they were going. Later that week, there was a torrential rain, and it washed away all the arrows without a trace. But the camp went on. By then, everyone knew the way. The arrows were gone, but their direction was still with us. It was a busy and great camp, and I was tired after we finished on the last day. That night, I went to bed early, and in my own twilight between sleeping and waking, I could almost hear the sounds of the kids' voices one more time. Then I woke up completely and found myself in a darkened room. It was absolutely quiet. But the life of the camp and the kids' voices were inside me. The outward sign was gone, but its energy remained in me. Everything we do is meant to point beyond itself to something more. Nothing is for its own sake. In a church, it's not the fellowship or the organization or the budget or the liturgy or the building. They're all arrows that point beyond themselves. They point to love that will be with us when all the arrows are gone. Questions? Do you see the arrows? Where do they point you? How do you feel when they disappear? What's your direction now? What will you do? I've got one here for Claire. I hope this won't make her too uncomfortable. And then a conclusion. The bad wolf. Here it comes. When my daughter Claire was about 4, she had a really scary nightmare. It may have been prompted by the gas furnace outside her door that came on with a bang in the middle of the night. She dreamed a giant wolf was tearing through the wall of her room and coming to get her. She screamed bloody murder. I was amazed that a child so small could make a sound so large and chilling and piercing. It was pure fear. a life or death fear, and it was everywhere, filling everything, contagious, leaving room for nothing else. Claire was in terror when I reached her. Of course, it wasn't nearly enough to reason with her, the reasonable person that I can be, of course, to show evidence and prove there was no wolf in the room or in the closet or under the bed. There was no wolf coming through the wall or even in the yard or anywhere in the neighborhood. There was no wolf, no wolf. She was afraid and not about to be talked out of it. The fear made it hard for Claire to sleep, and the following days the wolf was still with her. It took a few days, but we finally chased the bad wolf from Claire's room. I held her hand, and she tightly held mine, and we went looking for the wolf several times a day. We'd knock on pieces of furniture in the room to scare him out. We'd check the closet and under the bed. We'd tell him to go away. These were our wolf hunts. Finally, she laughed, and the wolf was gone. Fear is easier to face when there's a hand to hold. Fear is easier to face with love. Fear can paralyze, but it can be broken with a laugh. One of the most frequently repeated commands in the scripture is fear not. Jesus tells his followers not to fear those who can do nothing worse than kill the body. He tells his disciples not to be anxious about persecution or worried about what to say when called before the authorities for the sake of the gospel. He urges his disciples not to be anxious about food or clothing. When the angel Gabriel appears to Mary at the Annunciation, and again when the angel of the Lord appears to the shepherds to announce Jesus' birth, they offer assurance. Do not be afraid. After Jesus' resurrection, an angel says to the women, do not be afraid. They quickly leave the tomb to tell the disciples about the resurrection and then encounter Jesus himself, who says to them, do not be afraid. Fear no evil, not even in the valley of the shadow of death. As we let go of fear and anxious self-concern, we can begin to trust and share the faith we're called to live. Questions. When were you afraid? What scared you? How did fear shape the way you saw things? What could you do about the fear? What broke the fear? Did anyone help? Have you ever helped a frightened person out? The dogs cry. It was St. Francis Day and the blessing of the pets at St. Raphael's Parish in Lexington, Kentucky. Most of the parishioners brought dogs to bless, and one brought a beagle. She entrusted her beagle to a friend when she went to run an errand, but the beagle didn't like that. He did what beagles do so well. He cried mournfully and loudly for her return. Aroo! 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 Even though his person was some distance away, I'm sure she heard him. This reminded me of the poem Love Dogs by Rumi, the Sufi mystic. In this poem, he describes a simple man of prayer who encounters a cynic. The cynic challenges his practice of prayer, asking if he ever heard back any response to his prayers. The man admits he is not and ceases his prayer, stops praying. But then Kadir, a guide of souls, comes to him in a dream and suggests an image of the dog's cry for its master. Kadir explains, this longing you express is the return message. The cry itself is its own response, an expression of the bond of relationship, as a yearning prayer is itself union with God. There are love dogs no one knows the names of, Rumi says. Give your life to be one of them. The desire to pray is itself a prayer. The seeking of union with God is itself an expression of that union. God's grace precedes and upholds our prayer. God in us prays to God for union with God in us. Our cry to God is God crying out through us for the love of God that God will provide. With God's grace, we may go beyond our human limitations. Shortly after the Transfiguration, a man asked Jesus to heal his son if Jesus could. When Jesus challenged the man's lack of belief, he exclaimed, "I believe, help my unbelief." Prayer and fulfillment are deeply connected as Jesus grants the Father's request to heal his Son. Jesus urges us to ask and promises we'll receive. He urges us to seek and promises we'll find. He urges us to knock and promises the door will open. Like the beagle who yearns and cries for his master, our intent to share God's love expresses the sharing of God's love. Even the cry of separation is an expression of union. Our cry to God is God's cry in us, and union with God who hears us. Questions. When do you cry for God? How do you reach out for God? How do you know God is present? How does God find you?
At this time, we'll be open to any questions for Mr. Slocum on his presentation or his
Sure.
book. So,
Any questions, thoughts? Sure, Harry.
Well, if I'm not misunderstanding the intent of the book, you're trying to demonstrate God's presence.
Well, that's an interesting way to say it. I guess what I'm hoping to do is offer a way to seek God's presence, to be open to God's presence, to know God's presence. So it's not a proof, it's a path.
Well, all right, this is my question. Why does, if God's responsible, why does he make it so difficult for us?
Well, that might be a question that's a longer discussion. I may not have a quick answer. I guess the one thing I would say is I suggest we have in us the capacity to perceive. That doesn't make it easy all the time, and I certainly don't mean to suggest that it's easy at all. But I also mean to say that it's possible, and maybe part of what I'm hoping, and to this small extent to say, is maybe engaging this method opens a way of seeing that we sometimes miss. That there are reminders, signs, occasions, significances that we can bustle right past. That things that have been there staring us in the face that we miss if we close our eyes. And I've missed. I mean, kind of like back to the story of the VA hospital. I mean, that man was big as life and sitting on the floor and shaking his head, and all three of us just steamed right by him. And then one person saw it, but frankly, I didn't. I was, hey, I've got my tunnel vision on, I've got an appointment, I've got important things to do. I walked right past him. So the idea is maybe with this, it's a little easier to see what's there. So that's my take. Questions? Yes, ma'am. Diane.
Yes, when you've read some of these in the class I was in, as well as shared with me, and you had such great passion when you talked about it. And I'm wondering if you can just inspire us with not the stories, but with the passion that...
Well, I'm actually reflecting on that, and I can't remember. I don't think you got the benefit of hearing me do my beagle imitation. So, I don't know that. So there may be unrevealed passions that have yet to come online. But I don't know. All I can say is the images reach me in a way that goes beyond and below the reasonable. I mean, so as I say, I'm the reasonable me, like trying to persuade the 4-year-old who's just had a horrifying nightmare that there's really no reason to be scared shitless. I mean, she's scared to death. I mean, let me persuade you. No, I'm not going to be persuaded. But the idea is that this gets underneath that. And so it does that for me. I mean, these images. I mean, so like these are, pictures that in the moment when they happen, they there's something there. It's just like a response. I mean, a photography, and Jim will tell you this, is half the time you don't know what you're doing, but you're doing something. I mean, that moment occurred and you responded to it without even being aware. I mean, just kind of went around the reason completely. And so what I'm trying to do is provide a way that puts together the unreasonable and the reasonable, both sides of the brain, so to speak. And when that comes together, it can be very powerful. So that's my take. Yep.
It would seem to me that a lot of why God is hard to find is not because God makes himself so hard to find, but because we have put all those obstacles there, which speaks to that idea that if we can move it under or over or around to get there, that's worthwhile.
Yeah. Wow.
In your writing this, with the picture, the writing, and the questions, would they come sometimes immediately, or maybe it would take months to incubate before you say, okay, this picture matches with this story, and then the questions. How does a creative process happen with you?
Yes, both of those. I mean, there were times where just something came to me. It's just like, oh, wow. And I just like, right. And there were times it was just like sort of in the back of my mind. I mean, Victoria will know. I mean, a couple of these I actually would think about and would reject, and they would keep coming back, and I would reject them again, and they would keep coming back, and I'd finally say, oh, okay. I mean, I'm going to have to come to terms with this. I mean, I've got to do something with this, and so then I write it. So it's very, very much, spread out over time. As I say, the first one of these was written summer of '09, and the last, gosh, might have been, 12. Yeah. So I'm just saying, the writing process was spread out over a considerable period of time with lots of other things intervening. I mean, lots of exams graded and I mean, other things going on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
I'm always searching for time, and when I have time, I don't have energy, and I'm going to get the two together, and that would really help. So you have a set time, and this is the time for writing every day, or it's just like you're driving along and all of a sudden, wow, it comes to you and you've got to,
Well, you remember like we talked about in the Writing for Publication workshop, I strongly recommend budgeting time to do something. I mean, you budget time for what's important to you. I mean, you do. I mean, I'm going to want to have dinner someday or lunch someday, so I'm going to budget time for that. It's important. I'm going to want to get some sleep. I'm going to budget time for that. It's important. So I really recommend that. Honestly, I have to tell you, the way I write is just by fits and starts, and that's something I can do. So, I mean, if it's 15 minutes before we're going to eat, I can go upstairs and do something in 15 minutes. And, occasionally, like, will you get off the computer? It's time to go to, okay. So, but it's just little things, but just to do a little every day. That's the one thing I would say, is to keep a project alive. In other words, if I did nothing on it for, weeks or months on end, when I went back to it, it'd be kind of cold. So, I mean, but if I can find 5 minutes, I can keep connected with it. I mean, almost like a friend. I mean, if you can find 5 minutes to talk to your friend, you're still connected, whereas if you don't have any contact, it's much more remote. I mean, you can get back, but it's not as direct at first.
Any more questions?
I'll ask one more.
Sure.
How would you say that the experience of encountering these images affects your perception of time?
Interesting. That's an excellent question. Everything can be, that's kind of like back in the introduction, I was talking about kind of like, to see a world in a grain of sand. I mean, it's sort of like, the whole point is that everything can be, in a way, put into this moment. And that's really about, whether the arrows got washed away, or whether the monkey or not. It was just like that everything is in that moment, is summarized in that gesture, let's say. I mean, you could say a sacramental gesture. I mean, you could say all Christianity is summarized in lifting a chalice. I mean, everything goes into that moment. And so that really does wild things to your perception of time. I mean, if everything in my relationship with Victoria is shaped by giving a ring or receiving a ring, I mean, that whole dynamic in a relationship goes into something that takes place in a second. And it's phenomenal in that sense. So then you can have just hours, it's just like, well, what was that all about? And then this 1 second, it's just everything is in a flash. But again, kind of like back to photography, I mean, you can see, you know, a lot of just stuff that you really don't want to take a picture of or go weeks without one of this. So like, wow, there it is. It's just waiting to be taken. Last night, we were in a class talking about some of these images, and there's one about taking the next step. And the person who was responding to this is someone who travels a lot, and she was saying, I always want to take the next step. And it's like, if I don't take it, what's going to be there? I mean, what is waiting for me to see that I won't see? And so it's almost like this moment, it's all in this single step. It's kind of like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. When you take the one step, in a way, you're taking the journey. So, thanks. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Charles?
Just a few more questions about the mental patient. You didn't go through the questions on that one.
I did. I actually, what happened is I pulled my little tab, and I didn't want to leave you, but let me see if I can find that back. I did this presentation for the Dominican Conference on Higher Education in the Chicago area summer a year ago, and that time I brought the right flash drive, which has all of the images in the book on a tumble, and I explained to the people who came to it that these are not illustrations, so there's no direct correlation between the picture and what you're hearing. And yet, when I was speaking to them on a couple of occasions, there was this like, you know, this different kind of attention that was in the room. And someone asked me afterwards, said, didn't you say there's no relationship between the pictures and the text? And I said, yeah, it's just random. It changes every so many seconds. There's no control of that whatsoever. Well, when you were talking about hands, one of the images of hands, the hand image came up on the screen. And when like the rabid dog, a dog picture came up on the screen, I said, well, that just happened. I didn't make it happen. It just occurred.
You had your back to the screen, as I recall.
Yeah, I had my back to the screen.
So
I didn't even know what was happening. I just could tell something was, this guy, whoa. I was like, what? I didn't say anything different, did I? I mean, what happened? Was everything okay? Anyhow. So with this, the questions, turning around. Do you hurry past the patient as he sits on the floor, or do you turn around, putting yourself in that scene? When have you been surprised by another's unexpected need? When is your routine a distraction from what you need to see?
Anyone else have any other questions? Or okay, we're going to wrap it up this time. Thank you.
Great.
Dr. Slocum,
Thank
for
you
the
so much.
presentation. Appreciate your time. Dr. Slocum has some books set out here. He will be signing the books if you do have his book. We have a food tray over here, and then on the left there's Sprite. On the right there's water that is open for your, if you want any of it, take as much as you want. And we'll wrap it up there. So, thank you for coming.